Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Happy Monday. We are very excited to kick off our AlphaNooner series this week with Jakob Iotte from Grown Rogue, here to talk about all things going on the company level, as well as kind of touching base on state story level. And then, of course, everyone is focused on the federal things, what is coming to pass potentially, looking into the rest of 2024. So a lot to cover here. Very, very excited. Good reminder, of course, if you're out there, one, thanks for joining, but two, if you have any questions, comments, please put them in the chat. We would love to hear from you. Jakob, thanks for joining. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me again. I'm doing great.
It's been a long time. Well, so I don't know how much you want to get into it, but also another congratulations. I know you have an expansion to your family, which is very exciting. I know you're back in the workflow of it. How's it been managing kind of family and work?
It's been good. I had a little girl. She's 6 weeks old, Julia Ray. So kind of just getting back into things over the last couple of weeks, and really excited to kind of get back in and talk Grown Rogue again.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I do think if you're working in a high intensity industry like cannabis, that's sort of intense, you got to be making fast decisions. You got to be, carrying a lot of responsibility. It feels like very analogous to fatherhood, I imagine, in terms of, being in the trenches and getting through it. But that's fantastic. Yeah, let's talk Grown Rogue. I would love to kind of start on talking through the year so far. I feel like you've had a great year, a very busy summer. Can you kind of take us through, catch us up, kind of high level, what sort of the highlights have been this year so far?
Yeah, so first, Grown Rogue is a wholesale-focused, flower-focused indoor cultivator in Oregon and Michigan, soon to be harvesting in Jersey in November. So we've got about 50,000 square feet of indoor in Oregon, 50,000 square feet of indoor in Michigan, 50,000 square feet of indoor in New Jersey. We call it the Grown Rogue sweet spot. It's about 15,000 to 17,000 square feet of bench space that can produce about 1,000 pounds of indoor flower a month. And then we have a smaller outdoor business in Oregon that does about 10,000 pounds a year. So sorry, just to give a little background of Grown Rogue.
No, I think that's fantastic. But so in general, things seem to be firing off on all cylinders in general. I know people were very excited about Jersey. It's been a state that's been kind of beloved by people in general. And you guys, like you mentioned, have gotten into Jersey, which is very exciting. I would love to spend a little time there kind of talking through, I know it's, the end of the summer, but just for anyone who is new and joining, kind of what brought you into Jersey and how that start has gone so far.
Yeah, so we were kind of looking for a new market in kind of 2023, raised some convertible debentures early in the year, and then in the summer, once we identified that Jersey was going to be the market, we felt that Jersey was the number one market in the U.S. for us, just based on how pricing looked and how the competition looked, how many licenses we're giving out, what the capital in the industry looked like, and so that still looks to be true. A lot of the companies in the space that are in Jersey and in Illinois are talking about the wholesale opportunities because of how fast the retail market has exploded. Dispensaries in Jersey are up 4x, while there's not been a huge increase in cultivation capacity in New Jersey, which creates a bit of a scarcity at the retail level that has kept prices elevated for a lot longer than what we thought. And so we're really excited to get into that market. We announced the agreement last October and are now a month away from harvesting. So about 13 months from announcement to harvest, we think is a pretty solid timeline. When you look at, sometimes it takes two to 3 years to get to where, we're at today. So we're really excited and then expect selling in December and, phase 2 coming online sometime Q1, Q2 of 2025.
Okay, so kind of a 2025 story generally, but pretty fast setup in the rest of 2024 to get that done, which is fantastic.
We're going to see a little bit of revenue in 2024, but yeah, the large increase is going to come Q1 2025 and beyond that.
Okay, that's fantastic. And then can you take us through sort of the practical, how you got that done? Because I know there's still more right to acquire for some of ABCO. Can you take us through that, just kind of high level as well?
Yeah, so we have 70% ownership. So right now we have 44% ownership of Abco Garden State, which is the license holder of the Jersey license. We can only have that amount of percent of ownership until 2 years post operations commencing, as per the terms of the social equity license in Jersey. And so once once we can acquire up to 70%, we will. And then we have, we want to own 100% of all of our assets over time. And so there is a plan to be the full owner of that asset.
Okay, so acquiring it as fast as you can, but kind of ramping up with what's allowed. That totally makes sense. So again, I think Jersey seems to be a state that people are very excited about, and it has shown kind of some strong performance so far. Are there any like specific company goals or kind of expectations for Jersey that you can kind of take us a little deeper into?
Some big expectations. I think this is,
Sure.
we look at this as the transformational asset for Grown Rogue, the one that's going to kind of start the flywheel that Jersey's going to fund the next market, which is going to fund the next market, which is going to help us, kind of build a national footprint. That's our goal: 10 to 12 states, over 100 million, population in those states, and believe with that footprint that we can create a lot of value for our consumers, for our employees, and for our shareholders.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think I had seen a tweet that you had put out that was basically to that same effect of like, this is the turning point, this is the big deal. And I can definitely see where you're coming from on that. So you mentioned, furthering, you're not done growing. You do want to continue to kind of expand that footprint. I know you're looking kind of at a handful of states. Can you talk about what sets up your kind of larger map of what you're looking at in terms of footprint to grow into? And then we'll focus in on kind of how you make the decisions from that larger pool.
Yeah, so it's 100% based on return.
Mhm.
Obviously we have kind of, to get to our 10 to 12 state footprint, we have states mapped out that we think are going to be kind of the near term states and the longer term states. And it's just really, what does the pricing look like today? What do we think the pricing is going to look like tomorrow? And that's kind of correlated with competition. The less competition, the higher prices, typically are. So that's kind of how we look at it. We've identified before Missouri we like, Ohio we like, Pennsylvania we like. We talked earlier a little bit about Florida, watching that, see how adult use in Florida plays out. But we would love to be in, a market like Florida, New York, or California, a huge market that, we think that we can compete anywhere. And so those markets are really attractive to us with how big
Yeah,
they are.
that's fantastic. Does anything have to do with the fact? So I know California versus, which has been online and adult use for a long time now, versus something like Ohio, where recently we've seen adult use come online, versus something like Pennsylvania or Florida, where we haven't quite seen it yet. Things are in the works, but nothing is quite set in stone yet. How do you kind of separate on that aspect? Do you separate at all the opportunity based on what has already been adult use versus kind of what is still kind of a risk a little bit of not?
Yeah. Adult use or kind of flipping to adult use in the shorter near term. So yeah, I think Pennsylvania is probably, 12 to 18 months out. That would be perfect for kind of our timeline. Um, yeah, we don't want to speculate too far, multiple years ahead. We don't want to do that, but we can look a year ahead and say this is, how the market's probably going to look.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I still am shocked personally that Pennsylvania has taken so long to turn on. I know it's one of those things, and um, I don't know if it's just because so many people have access to the medical side of things that there's a slowness to kind of get it together on the adult use side, but still one that has shocked me. But you're right, that seems like a reasonable timeline in terms of things turning on there. Um, any other states that are kind of maybe even in between? I think Virginia might have been on your list of expansion, but I know that's sort of a weird one where they kind of have, but they still have an illicit market that they're kind of battling and have not really launched in as nice as a way as some other states like Maryland, like Ohio have. Any
Yeah.
thoughts there?
Yeah. I would say that's a bit of a more longer term look as well. Um, yeah, I would say those three that I mentioned before, and then Minnesota and Maryland are also kind of near term markets that we're looking at going
Okay.
into.
Yeah. Okay. I think that makes sense.
And then kind
Any
of to complete the footprint, we're going to need a couple other states to really be a national brand. And that's really what we're trying to become over the next 5-ish years.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So on the opposite side of kind of things that you're looking for in a state that you want to grow into or a market that you want to grow into, anything outside of just the opposite that you're looking to avoid in a certain state? Is there anything that sort of, you know, is a turnoff in terms of a new market that you'd avoid?
Not really. I would just say we're focused on flower. So like,
Mhm.
you know, processing in Texas doesn't really excite us. It has to be, cultivation. That's our core. That's what we believe we excel deeply at and where our competence is.
Yeah, okay. I think that makes total sense. Anything that you guys are focusing on from kind of a business perspective in the meantime? I know we will talk about what's going on kind of on a regulatory side of things with potentially rescheduling and all of those things, but anything in the meantime that you guys are focused on outside of the growth from a market perspective that seems to be really helping you guys in the kind of current term?
Um, Not really. Beyond Jersey, we have Illinois coming online 2025. We're kind of in the pre-plan, pre-construction phase of that. So that's kind of something that we're, putting effort and focus into. That's, like I said, more of a 2025 story. Believe we'll be done with construction in Q1 or first half of 2025, operational with phase one in the second half of 2025, and then phase two coming online in 2026.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I think a clear plan is a solid one. So I think that's fantastic to be kind of focused on that in that way.
Yeah.
I know it's nothing that we have control over or that you have control over from a company perspective, but do want to talk kind of about the federal aspect of things and where things are kind of standing there. It seems like we're on track with rescheduling. I know waiting on that December 2nd hearing coming up. How are you as a company kind of thinking about those changes coming up? How are you are you planning for them, planning around them, not planning for them at all? What's sort of the general
Yeah,
take there?
I would say we're more talking about them than planning for them right now, just because
Okay.
there's, we don't have kind of a clear timeline on how long rescheduling potentially is going to take.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, more so just talking about it with our team, the opportunities, and kind of things of that nature, and how 280 potentially affects our tax situation is something obviously we talk about quite frequently.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit more detail in terms of how that, because I know different companies, and most companies I feel like are positively impacted by having more money in general from that 280E relief. Can you talk about, I guess, more specifically how it impacts you from a company perspective?
Yeah, so we definitely don't benefit as much as say a pure vertical operator, because most
Mhm.
of our kind of labor costs can be expenses, cost of goods sold, and but there is selling costs, corporate costs that are affected by 280E. That if 280E were to go away, we would save a non-zero amount of money, probably six figures. But really, for us, what we're focused on is kind of the growth in front of us for 2025, that no matter what happens at the federal level, we think that we're going to see explosive growth from New Jersey and then later on from Illinois. And so, really, that's where 99% of our focus is. We talk about rescheduling, Florida adult use, how that can change the market and the equities and things of that nature. But mostly, it's just how do we execute in New Jersey. Last time I said, I think we understand the intensity of the moment that we're in. Like, we have to stay focused on executing the business, otherwise it can get away from us. And so
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I really admire about Grown Rogue is we've never tried to do 10 things at once. We've tried to do one thing at once, make sure we do it to the best of our abilities, and then focus on doing the next thing.
Yeah, that focus definitely pays off for sure. I think that's especially important right now, not getting ahead of your skis and not kind of counting on things that are hard to count on. We've definitely seen that in the past with things like safe. I know that's been a big thing where some companies have thought maybe that is something that's coming, has not shown up yet. Again, we'll have to wait and see. Um, again, I do think scheduling does feel like it is in progress, but I ultimately understand not trying to kind of take it too much into account. If you mentioned 280E not impacting or not having too big of an impact, outsized impact for you guys, just to bring it back a little bit, what's sort of the other big benefit or impact do you see for you on rescheduling? Is it sort of that normalization component? Is it sort of potentially the possibility for something like uplisting that would kind of bring in those investor dollars? What else do you see in terms of potential impacts on that front?
Yeah, I would say normalizing for sure, just making the market bigger. And of course, we think that we can take share within the same market. And so, of course, having a market expand is ideal for us. And then if the credit card piece comes into play, I think that has some big growth, and we've seen that can be a double digit or 20% plus increase in spending in the industry. And so yeah, I think normalization, and I guess that's just a further piece of normalization, just using a credit card like a typical business. And so yeah, I think
Yeah,
those are
it's so
the main aspects. And of course, allowing people to have bank accounts, easier access to capital. We've heard the horror stories of people getting their accounts shut down, and everything under the sun. And so just yeah, normalization of an industry that's growing, that we know has great properties, that's safer than some of the other legalized drugs that are on the market today.
yeah, treating a business like a business, which again feels like the bare minimum, but we're getting there and understand that it's obviously emerging, and those are some of the battles that have to be fought on that way to, operating like a normal business, which makes sense. You mentioned, what did you mention? You mentioned something that reminded me of kind of eating into and growing into other areas of the market. I feel like I've seen a ton of stories around alcohol use kind of decreasing a little bit, being replaced by cannabis a lot of the time. Do you see that as a trend coming in as a way to find extra growth kind of general? I know that's sort of more industry than kind of company specific, but anything that you guys see on that front?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we've seen kind of alcohols struggle a little bit. They've had to continue to try to innovate to kind of maintain sales. But yeah, that's definitely something I see, and something you see with the younger demographic is they're using less alcohol, using more cannabis, and using more non-flower products, which is something obviously we're watching, being a flower only producer. Um, but flower has held its market share, pretty well over time. We've been told for years and years that flower was going to be, a very small part of the market, and flower plus pre rolls remains over 50% of the market in almost every single state. And so that's a trend that we're watching, but it's still a large market and a large category for us.
Yeah, that's great. Do you think that, I feel like there's been a lot of conversations around sort of beverages, those sort of things, and again, whether that's hemp or cannabis beverages as sort of an on-road for people who maybe are traditionally alcohol only, drinkers or um, consumers ultimately, that sort of being an on-road for them into the world of cannabis, which could be edibles, which could be flower, which could be sort of any of those things, vapes. Are you seeing that at all in terms of kind of a growing market, kind of generally
Yep.
from all those things? Are you benefiting? Do you feel like you're benefiting from those?
Yeah, I think as just the normalization of cannabis happens and people do go to flower,
Hmm.
but yeah, you're right. Just a lot of the people that come into the market from, like, say, Delta 8, or from smoking just a vape, they're going to come in and be an edible user, or be a non-flower user. But expanding the category, like, I truly believe in cannabis, and so it doesn't matter to me how you use it. Just rather you use it other than other drugs that are extremely dangerous.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So I feel like from a consumer perspective, that totally makes sense. And I think the kind of case is very clearly outlined from sort of more of an investing perspective. What are you, what kind of conversations are you guys having with investors, with people who are interested in investing in the cannabis space right now, and kind of making the case for including something like Grown Rogue in their portfolio?
Yeah, so I think we're a little bit different than most other companies. The reason why is we're wholesale focused, flower focused, indoor focused, cultivator, like I mentioned before, and we're producing industry leading margins in some of the most competitive markets in the U.S. And we have a great balance sheet. We have the access to capital and bandwidth that will allow us to build a nationwide portfolio. And so I think what separates us is the amount of growth that we have in front of us. We look out a couple of years and see multiple hundreds of percent top line, bottom line growth. That's going to be hard for some of the other operators to do, just because they're either too big or they're too leveraged. They don't have the balance sheet or the bandwidth to you know do what we are planning to do over the next couple of years.
Yeah, definitely a benefit of not overextending yourself, I guess, ultimately in the short term when everyone is very, very aggressive around um, you know, expanding their footprint very, very aggressively, or kind of taking on some debt to finance some things. So I think that definitely makes a good case in general. Any thoughts
Yeah.
specifically kind of towards, I know there's a big debate on tier ones, tier two, like all those sort of things like that. Is there any sort of thing that you would talk to around not just looking at sort of tier ones and kind of really focusing in? I guess you kind of have covered it, but anything else kind of additional on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said, I feel like we were unique. Like even when people were bashing tier threes and tier fours for years and years, like I just never put I just had a belief that Grown Rogue was different than what other companies were. And so, people weren't wrong to say, hey, tier ones, because of all the tier threes, tier fours that didn't make it. We look at our, what people used to say our peer group was a lot of West Coast outdoor, operators that are no longer around. And so, understand, but there's always going to be that diamond in the rough. And, we've always felt that. We've competed against some of the larger operators where they've had to leave Oregon, they've had to leave Michigan because they couldn't compete. And we're producing, like I said, industry leading EBITDA margins in those markets. So we're confident in our ability. We've shown that we can win market share in Oregon, in Michigan, and we're going to show that we can do it in Jersey, Illinois, and almost everywhere else we go.
That's very exciting. All right. Well, it sounds like you guys have a busy but exciting end to 2024, and definitely a rocket-filled 2025, ready to go and hit the ground running in the new year. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? I feel like this has been great.
No, I would just say, I'm as an investor also looking at Florida adult use. I think that that's potentially industry changing for the equities. And obviously, a market that's so tourist heavy, bringing that into the normalization is going to be super, super helpful. There's, billions of dollars of tourism spend that is being missed because cannabis is illegal in Florida or just medical, and it going to adult use will, I think is the reigniter of the sector. And I think, for me, it's easier to kind of underwrite that because it has a specific date. We know on November 6th, we're going to know what happened in Florida. We don't really know with rescheduling what's going to happen on December 3rd. It could take, into late 2025. So, there's a lot less clarity on the timeline of rescheduling than there is on Florida adult use. So I think that's something that I'm watching, and something Grown Rogue, like I said, is watching very closely. Florida is a very important market, has great pricing, huge population, a market that we would love to get into over time.
I definitely agree. I feel like the economic component, very, very important and a strong case for the Florida market. But I do also think, not to tie too much into the normalization component, but I do think a more conservative state kind of taking that on is also another sign that things are kind of heading in that right direction, which would be great to see. Definitely looking forward to on the other side in November 6th. That'll be interesting to see. Fingers crossed. But thanks for taking the time, Jacob. Really, really appreciate it. Everyone, thanks for being on. It's great to kind of sit down and chat. And hopefully we'll have you on soon. I feel like it'd be great to hear how Jersey's going and everything else. And it'll be a busy, great year.
If anyone has any questions, reach out to me on Twitter, grownrogue.com, everything of that sort. So please look us up. And if you have any questions, please let me know. And thank you, Mackenzie and AdvisorShares. Thank you. Thank you for having us in the ETF.
Of course, anytime. Thanks for being on. And thanks for doing so great. Really, really appreciate it. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.